So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and I'm delighted to say that we are on the test patch today on 0.97, and I have been given the green light to go ahead and do this replay, so I hope this doesn't cause me to step on anyone's toes or anything, because that would horrify me certainly. But as I'm sure you can see, this is also going to be a new map, which I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, because not only has J-Monster posted up the building of this map, at least a sort of little walkthrough of it, but also Indie Pride has posted up a battle replay that we did in this very same session on this map, and this is of course the ruins of DOL GULDUR, which J-Monster made. And we'll go through the map first of all, because it is pretty significant with regards to what we're going to be seeing in the future from made maps, because a lot of assets have been ported over and will be continue to be ported over, I'm sure, from Battle for Middle-earth too, so we'll be seeing a lot more variety in the buildings that we're going to be seeing. So over here I believe this is one of the Isengard buildings from Battle for Middle-earth 2, and also there's a lot of these structures around here as well. A lot of new things, so a lot of little orc encampments, a lot of building going on the ruins of DOL GULDUR here. So this obviously means that scenario and map makers, people like WK, you know, the big one obviously, and then there's people like Horton as well, maybe Froggy and Outfit, also Darkwolf and Vision. All of the people that I usually credit for making scenarios will have a lot more tools available for them, which is obviously going to be a good thing, because it's going to lead to a lot more interesting maps. This one, however, was made by J-Monster, as I've said before, and it will also be a part of an upcoming Tug of War event, which I'm not sure when that's going to start, but this is going to be this is going to be one of the main maps used in that, one of the most significant ones, because it is going to be sort of a tug of war between Mirkwood and an upcoming new faction, obviously, in DOL GULDUR. But as for the map itself, it is obviously kind of a more open cityscape in how it plays, because obviously there are a lot of these buildings you can take cover in, but it's not quite as confined as a lot of the other cityscapes are, where you can basically block a street with a single unit of pikes and spears to sort of stop the enemy advance. It's a little bit more complicated here, a lot more wide open spaces, a lot of opportunities for flanking and so on and so forth. So there's also a little mine over here, which is good to see. As for the map itself, however, this is a scenario, so the armies were pre-picked, and the scenario is that Mirkwood are here in the middle. They marched into DOL GULDUR, and now they find themselves surrounded on all sides by a Mordor army, a Misty Mountains army, and an Angmar army to the west, east, and south. Now, the Mirkwood army's goal really is just to survive. You know, in both of the previous battles I'm sure you saw on Indie Pride's channel, Mirkwood were completely overrun very quickly, because all three of the armies descended on them very quickly. In that case, the Lothlorien army's goal, which is myself and Indie Pride, our job is to try and avenge Mirkwood then. But in an ideal scenario, our sort of primary victory condition really is to try and save Mirkwood, who are going to be played by J-Monster over here, and then we have all of the orc armies, of course, around them. I'm not quite sure how Mirkwood managed to march in and not notice a huge array of orcs all around them, but it is also worth saying that this is where the primary phases of the battle will take place more here in the middle of the ruins of DOL GULDUR, whereas the two sides over here are just sort of starting areas and areas where they'll be marching through. But obviously, in the future, this map can be used for other things as well, because it's so big and vast, and there's a lot going on here. So I'd be interested to see a free-for-all on this map, actually, when 0.97 comes out. Again, it seems like the sort of map which would really play well for that, just because of the amount of variety. There's a lot of trees out in the area where the ruins end as well, obviously, with it being in Mirkwood itself. But I think we'll go through the attacking armies first of all. We'll go through the orcs first, because their job is quite simple. They need to overwhelm Mirkwood and then hold back the advance of Lothlorien. So we will start off with the Mordor army, which this is the army I played as in the battle, which is on Indie Pride's channel. So please go and check that out, because it gives another perspective on this, and obviously Indie Pride is very, very good at what he does. He's got some, well, Eclipse 2500 has got some Moran on guard here at the front, who have had a little bit of a makeover. You know, they now actually are more in line with the Moran infantry and the Moran halberds, and instead of just being, they looked very much like the orc fodder in their old model, which is a model they've had ever since vanilla, so they've been given a little bit of an upgrade, just to show that they aren't garbage spearmen. You know, they aren't the best still. You know, they're not up to the same level as the heavy goblin spears, because they do not have that AP, but still, they will still do the same job as sort of standard spears, and he's got, I believe, 3 units of them around on guard. So again, maybe not the most deadly units one-to-one against particularly the Elves of Mirkwood with their very high skill, but in numbers, you know, and if they find those gaps, they can overrun. Like in the historical scenario we just saw, the one that Belagost and company made, the orcs won that by not having armies of good quality, but they just overrun the thin defensive lines, and Mirkwood will have it all to do to try and stay alive. The Moran infantry, of course, which will be a little bit better in close combat with the elves, just because they don't have that spear malice holding them back, but they still have a huge quality discrepancy up against units like Hiri Alf and Hiri Lang. Back here we have the Savages of Karhost. Not sure how to say that really, but yes, it's the heavy maulers essentially. The slightly stronger of the basic Mordor shock troops with their large serrated axes, AP, but again the AP not going to be terribly useful against Mirkwood, it must be said. There's more morale on infantry over there. Over here on this side we have a very key unit actually for Mordor in this fight, because we have the Minas Morgul Chosen. These heavy spears, when they get into shield wall, can be very, very difficult to dislodge. They can also push through enemy lines, which if Mirkwood find themselves getting overrun very, very quickly, it will be largely because of mass pushing through their lines, because if it turns into a grindy fight for the Orcs, they could end up losing more than they want, because they will need a pretty substantial number of their army surviving if they want to go up against the two Lothlorien armies that are advancing from the trees. And the Minas Morgul Chosen can make quick work of a thin Elven line by pushing through them, but also in sustained combat their armour will keep them alive longer than the lower tier troops that they're fighting alongside. We also have a fairly substantial number of Sauron's Will actually. Again, the AP is not going to be too useful, but just overall quality wise they are stronger than the basic Orcs that Mordor can field, and they can be a pretty good unit for Mordor, and in this case as well that extra quality will help them even if the AP will not. They also have some troll drummers, which are going to be pretty key for keeping the Orcs sort of fighting and not having them break quite so easily. Very key unit, of course, for both Mordor and the Misty Mountains. Back here we have the Maulers of Narcost, which, again, very basic Orc Axemen, can be very useful. Probably least useful against the lightly armoured Elven factions of Lindon and Mirkwood, to be honest, because their low skill will really hurt them. But again, a lot of men in this unit, 253. So that's going to lead to, sort of, again, the Orcs, primarily for dealing with Mirkwood, what they want to be doing is using their numbers to swarm in and over them, rather than sort of playing into their hands and fighting a more grindy battle. More Morannon units back here, more Maulers, more Sauron's Will. And back over here I believe we have the elites, so we do have some Sauron's Will, more Sauron's Will, and we have of course the mighty Temple Executioners, which have their new model as well. This is something which obviously they share with Numenor in the upcoming patch. Very, very strong obviously. As far as heavy swordsman bodyguards go, one of the strongest. Only the Noldorin Blade Masters can beat them in one-to-one combat, and that is because of their higher defensive skill. The Templar Executioners do have that higher armour, which could come in handy in a real battle situation where arrows and the like are flying around all over the place as well. The General, however, will be in. Again, I forgot to turn off the Steam notifications. The General will be in the Witch King's Accursed, which of course the Minas Morgul bodyguard previously, slightly different to the other units because they have that darker armour and Sauron's eye painted on their breastplate. The General obviously going to be here. A good unit, a good bodyguard unit, safe enough because of the shields and the armour, but obviously not as damaging as the Temple Executioners. And then the final unit of note, in addition to more Minas Morgul Chosen over here, the mighty Olag High, which obviously these heavy trolls can do a lot of damage to just about anything, but trolls can be a bit susceptible to being overwhelmed if you send them in on their own, but in conjunction with this large Mordor force, the trolls, the Olag High in particular, could be very, very deadly indeed. Over on the other side, we have the Misty Mountains army, which is going to be played by Engsfit. His general is going to be in a very similar unit to the Witch King's Accursed. That is the Goblin King's bodyguard. Very, very similar units, even in colour scheme, with that sort of dark metal with the sort of rusty red aesthetic as well. Again, can stand up to the elves just because of their higher quality overall. They're elite as far as the orcs go. But again, you probably don't want to send them in first. You want to be using your numbers first and foremost. And of course, heavy goblin infantry will do that. Again, not quite as strong as the Morannon infantry from Mordor, but still a lot of numbers that the goblins bring to the table. Goblin infantry there, and we also have the cave troll drummers, so once again a morale battery essentially, which will keep in particular the Misty Mountains, the goblins have a little bit of a problem with breaking if you don't support them properly, and the drummers can really help keep them in the fight for longer. More heavy goblin infantry. Another very key unit is going to be the White Uruk Fearmongers. Mirkwood of course have no phalanx units, which is something the elves overall can struggle with a little bit, other than Lindon of course with their very plentiful pikes. Even Lothlorien and Imladris, they have pikemen, but they're very expensive, so generally speaking you won't see huge amounts of them on the field. So the White Uruk Fearmongers could be a very good choice here. Their AP won't be too useful again against Mirkwood, but it's the phalanx that will do it, and obviously the White Uruk Fearmongers also cause fear, which could have an effect on the elves if things start to go very badly for them, which it could with the numbers that they're facing. The heavy goblin crossbows also could set up a position on one of the pieces of high ground, which again, the stopping power of crossbows will do damage to just about anything very quickly, so this is something J-Monster is going to have to be on the lookout for. We have the Drake Broodlings with their floating torches, which is still something which hasn't changed ever since they were implemented. Very high charge damage, of course, and a scary unit to be fighting off against when you're having to fight on all sides and you're surrounded. More goblin infantry, more crossbows, and that's pretty much the gist of this army, to be honest with you. Overall, it's probably the army of the least quality that the orcs have, but again, the Misty Mountains are very used to that. Numbers is the name of the game for them. And then the final army, we have the mighty Kuroguro-chan, who in the Battle on Indie Pride's channel really gave me and J-Monster what for when he was playing as Lothlorien. So we'll see what he's able to do as Angmar. He has got some upgraded Witch Realm Scourge Raiders actually, and we will be able to see the Witch Realm Scourge Raiders' new form here, because they do have those throwing axes which they can now use in addition to being quite a damaging melee combatant as well. And they've got a lot of Witch Realm Scourge Raiders, I think, in this battle. So yeah, good high base damage, and they could do a lot of damage to the elves here, because the Witch Realm Scourge Raiders not half bad in melee either. They will need to use their ranged capabilities to their fullest if they really want to do some damage, but they can definitely stand up for themselves in melee. And then obviously we have the Witch Realm Blackguard as the General's Bodyguard. They are certainly stronger than the Witch King's Accursed and the Goblin King's Bodyguard, the equivalents from the other two Orc factions today. This is sort of Angmar's. This is where Angmar focused in a little bit more after all. Angmar with their very scary elite units. Mordor do have that as well, but not so much a sword and board unit for them. Trolls of Angmar, of course, again. Trolls are very heavy duty trolls at that. And we also have some Witch Realm Hammer Guard. So Angmar overall have got some very scary units on the field today. They have some Gundabad Guard, which obviously we will be seeing slightly more of in 0.97 now that spears have been made a lot more useful. We've got more Scourge Raiders, more Gundabad Guard, more Scourge Raiders again. It's a very... You can certainly see the composition of this army is quite similar with the Gundabad Guard. They've also got some Witch Realm Pikemen upgraded as well. So Angmar certainly looking the scariest, I think, of the Orc army. Several units of pikes, in fact. They also have a second unit of trolls in the Trolls of Gundabad. We have the Witch Realm Scourge Raiders, more Scourge Raiders, and they also have a catapult, which, considering Merc would kind of have to clump together to sort of cover their angles, the catapult could be extremely useful, depending on what Kuro decides to do, because on the outside of the settlement, of course, he could try and turn around and stop Lothlorien's advance a little longer and hope that his allies can 2v1 Mirkwood effectively enough. So, we will now move on to the Elves. Again, I'm going through the army compositions a little bit slower because it is 0.97, so there are a few new things to take into account. But as far as Mirkwood goes, I think probably they're fairly similar, because the main addition to Mirkwood in 0.97 has been the addition of the Ents, but they don't have any Ents in this particular scenario, so they will be performing much as we've seen in 0.96. So we've got some Hiriek, which obviously is very heavy, heavy spearmen, very skilled. Mirkwood in general, only Linden has got higher skill values than them, because obviously Linden have even less armour than Mirkwood. But the Hiriek, obviously, very, very good. They're going to be able to hold the line if Angmar decide to charge in over this way. And obviously the support of the Elven Archers as well, the Hiri Peng, heavy Elven Archers, are very capable in melee as well, which they may need to get their hands dirty in melee quite quickly. Because with trolls with heavy spears that can push through the lines, the Archers may need to pull out their blades sooner than they would ideally like. Hiriek as well. Mirkwood, definitely in a pretty rough position over here. Hiri Lang, obviously heavy Elven Swordsman as well, will be able to carve through a lot of the lower tier Mordor and Misty Mountains armies like a hot knife through butter. More Hiri Peng up here, we can see up on the hills. The Hiriek. I wouldn't be surprised if Mirkwood does try to contest the hills, because if those crossbows get in position, it could be pretty ugly. We also have the General, which is going to be the Sindar of the Girdle, obviously very, very good multiple HP spear cav. They do lack a shield, which does mean over time Archers can have a pretty negative impact on a unit like this. The Mirkwood Cavalry does tend to be a little bit glass cannon-esque in how it performs, but once they get into melee, watch them go. The skill that they bring to the table is very, very significant. And then we've also got some Remnant of Amon Lank, which obviously they pull out their two-handed axes in melee, which is very, very effective, particularly against the Orcs that they're arrayed against. More Hiriek over here. We have the two, again, the other two units, the Elders of the Elven King, which obviously are the Archer General's Bodyguard, although the General is not in this unit, of course. And then, of course, we have the Mighty Palace Guard, which overall could be the most versatile bodyguard unit in terms of infantry in the game, because they're terrific in melee. I think they're still AP, and they have a huge anti-cavalry bonus as well. So that really isn't a situation that they can at least contest, if not outright dominate. And then we've also got more Hiri Lang. I believe there's a few units of Hiri Alth as well. Hiri Peng, Hiri Ak. I might be wrong. It doesn't look like there are any Hiri Alth actually. Just Remnant of Amon Lank over here. Interesting. So we will now move on to the Lothlorien armies, which I am a part of. So this is my army, of course, Lothlorien. J-Monster recently released a bit of a sort of update on what Lothlorien are all about, because Lothlorien tend to be the odd ones out in terms of the elves, particularly in 0.96, because they don't really have anything that sets them apart from the others. But Lothlorien will be getting a lot more in terms of particularly their archers, getting a lot of changes, which J-Monster has recently gone over, so highly advise you to check out that video if you want to see what Lothlorien are going to be getting in the near future. But we have the Inner Council here, which is obviously a very key unit for us in this battle, because not only do they bring the anti-cavalry capabilities, which will be useful against stuff like the Drake Broodlings should they decide to charge out over here, But the javelins are the main thing. The Inner Council are very, very devastating javelins. And then moving over into the centre of the line, we have the Sylvan Spears, and you can see that the Grey Cloaks for Lothlorien are certainly making a bit of a return. So really, a lot of the vanilla units at this point, there's very few units that are using the same models since vanilla. I think the Knights of Illuminus may be one of the only survivors at this point. Sylvan Spears have been given a little bit of an upgrade to sort of better gel with what Lothlorien is supposed to look like. Sylvan Spears. I've got 2 units of the Karos Galadhon's Guardians as well, which are the strongest pikes in the game because multiple HP. Their stats are also very good. You know, considering their pikemen, their stats are very, very good indeed. So their phalanx breaking is not necessarily the end because their hit points will keep them alive, and their stats will mean that you can try and sort of reform them a little bit without them getting absolutely slaughtered like with a lot of other pikes. We have the March Wardens of the Wood, which are one of the units which J Monster goes over in his video, getting a little bit of a change to their projectiles to make them even more effective. But even in this battle, you know, March Wardens of the Wood, basic Elven archers, we've seen how effective they can be in the past. AP is one thing that Lothlorien do have over the other elves. Is really the one selling point of them in 0.96.1, the fact they have these Lorien warriors, which obviously as two-handed axe units, they have the AP, which is very, very good of course. You know, something the other elves tend to lack a little bit and will make me that much more effective against the heavily armoured orcs. More March Wardens of the Wood. We've got some Karos Galadhon spears back here, which obviously the Lothlorien variant of the heavy elven spears. The heavy elven swordsmen as well, and the Karos Galadhon swordmasters. The Kindred of Celeborn. This is going to be my general's bodyguard. Haldir is actually here, but we can pretend it's Celeborn. Obviously, you know, the Sindar archers, they were previously named. Very, very strong indeed in melee and at range. And the Galatharan blade masters as well, which obviously the Sindar blade masters, they can hide. Very, very good overall. And then the final army we're going to go after, or go over before the battle begins, it's going to be Indy Pride's army. It was good to play with Indy Pride. So we have some Lorient axes here at the front. Obviously, as far as line infantry goes for the elves, again, Lothlorien got a little bit more of an aggressive focus on them, unlike stuff like the Imladris Guardians, which have a sword, focused a little bit more around their defensive skill. Lorient axes a little bit more attack value thanks to those axes they hold. 4 units of them, in fact, as well. Also the Lorient warriors, which again, AP, very, very useful. We have the Outward Company as well, which obviously the Golden Boys, grossly incandescent, very, very powerful at range and in melee. Karos Galadhon Swordmasters, excuse me, Kindred of Celeborn, and it's mostly a similar army for both of us. Like we've both got Karos Galadhon's Guardians as well. Lorien Sentries as well, which actually, this is a different unit because this is a little bit more in line with like the Eldar Makar, sort of basic Elven line infantry, which is a little bit more lightly armoured but very highly skilled. And some Company of the Mirror actually as well, which is the heavy Lothlorien archers, which that name actually implies that they're more elite than they are, I think. To be honest, I think Karos Galadhon archers may be a little bit more, just to show that they are of similar quality to the Swordmasters and the Spears. But yes, it's a pretty extensive look there at the army competitions, but without further ado, let's begin. And of course, the initial engagements are going to be very heavily focused within the settlement Mirkwood, trying their best to survive with their backs to the wall, and you can already see that J Monster is going to try and relocate to probably a little bit more of an enclosed area that he can try and defend a little bit more effectively. So you can see that already he's pulling his army back to the cover of the buildings. You can actually see already that the Sindar of the Girdle are probably going to take a more aggressive route against Mordor, which that is understandable because I know from experience Mordor does not have any sort of ranged units in this scenario, so the Sindar of the Girdle can sort of buzz around without fear of being zoned out by enemy archers or crossbows. The Misty Mountains of course have their crossbows, Angmar also have their Scourge Raiders, which could be a very deadly unit indeed if they are allowed to get several volleys off. Hiriak are also moving over, but Mordor very, very quickly trying to move in, which again is completely understandable. Mordor need to get into melee as quickly as possible, start leveraging those numbers to sort of swamp over Mirkwood, as does the Misty Mountains actually. You see the Misty Mountains are also moving rather quickly. Some of the units are sort of heading out there, the Drake Rulings potentially to try and break up the advance of myself and Indy Pride. But it's looking like, you know, Mordor already actually getting into melee, so the Hiriak are charging in. And actually I think it's about time already that we turn down the speed to half speed. So you can see that these Morannon Guard do manage to catch some of the Mirkwood units in melee, but of course without support the Hiriak will very, very easily poke and prod their way through Morannon Guard. So Mordor are going to have to get more and more of their units into melee as quickly as they can. Fortunately for them, the Minas Morgul Chosen are a little bit more robust. They'll be able to survive a little bit longer in melee. You can see that up here on these hills there are several routes that that Mirkwood can take to retreat. The Mountain Orc Berserkers are moving forward, so obviously a hidden unit for the Misty Mountains. You can see here several clumps of Mirkwood resistance already being engaged, the Hiriak. The Palace Guard are still out here, so they could engage and they would very easily rip their way through the Minas Morgul Chosen, even as heavily armoured as they are, especially when supported by Hiri Lang. And Kuro, you can see over here, has not moved his army. In fact, he's sort of getting ready and he is forming up, and he will be trying to sort of stop the advance of both myself and Indie Pride. Certainly Indie Pride, obviously, because he's in a little bit more of a central position. So Kuro will be sort of heading out into the open field, so he is going to be relying on both of his Mordor and Misty Mountains allies to try and finish off Mirkwood for him, which will give us, myself and Indie Pride, a little bit more time to play with, to try and get in here and support J-Monster, so Mirkwood will have a little bit more staying power in them when fighting 2 armies rather than 3, which is technically good for us, but we will also have to contend with Angmar out on the open field, which, particularly with all those Scourge Raiders, all those Trolls as well, could be a little bit of a problem for us as Angmar works to try and slow us down, but technically 2 2v1s could crop up in this battle. So the Hiriak, obviously fairly thick Elven front line here, as you can see the Morannon Guard already wavering because the morale buffers are not nearby. The Troll Drummers are very far away, in fact. The Minas Morgul Chosen are now charging in as well, but they're going toe-to-toe with the Palace Guard, and the Palace Guard, particularly seeing as the Minas Morgul Chosen unit seems to be a little bit stretched, some of them seem to be getting caught up on the Hiriak. The Palace Guard will absolutely love this fight. The Minas Morgul Chosen already shaken, in fact, so the might of the Mirkwood forces, the Mirkwood elites, really starting to show itself. Over here, however, is where Mordor seem to have concentrated most of their force, because there are a few more elites over here, in particular the Olag High and the Sauron's Will coming forward in a lot of numbers, but you can see back there the Mirkwood archers already in position, shooting in there. The Sindar of the Girdle just keeping an eye on them as they sort of cycle around the back to potentially get some nice charges into Mordor's rear. Mordor continuing to pile forwards, a lot of Sauron's Will. You can see actually the Olag High trying to retreat out of this fight, potentially to try and help zone out the camp, but I wouldn't agree with that. I would say the Olag High have potentially got the best opportunity to sort of push through the line to get into the archers, stop the archers from firing, and then Mirkwood would be in real trouble. The Sauron's Will, as it is, are a very good target to go after with the archers. While over here you can see that the Misty Mountains are now pouring over these hills. You can see this is a route they can take. In addition, Blackback Mountain Berserkers, so the Misty Mountains taking a very aggressive stance as well, which they need to do. Mirkwood, they can't allow Mirkwood to dig in all that much, otherwise, these Elven units will be able to get a lot of efficiency in the engagements they take. The Elders of the Elven King and the Remnant of Amalek still shooting into that huge Mordor blob. But now the Misty Mountains are going to prove to be ever more of a problem, I think. As you can see up here, the Mountain Orc Berserkers, actually victory seems certain for them against the Hiriak. I imagine that will change as the engagement continues, because their skill is so low that the Elven Spears should be just fine. But you can see out here, in this more open area actually, is where Mirkwood are having more joy, purely because the Mordor forces that were sent over here were a little bit more of a skeleton crew, to be fair. The Witch Kings Accursed are also charging in now, but without support, with all of these Mirkwood units, they could lose their general here, Mordor. Their drummers are over here at this point to sort of give that morale that they need. Also some Misty Mountains units are also coming in to support, but again, it's just heavy Goblin infantry, which Hiri Lang are going to have a very easy time against. However, here on the open field, let's see over here, so we've got Indie Pride moving his inner council, and there's still a little bit of marching to do as Indie Pride is sort of getting himself into position, as am I, as we're sort of continuing to try and charge towards the settlement. So, still, Illidan. But we can see these Hiri Peng. Good lord, that's... You can tell that J-Monster is sort of constantly retargeting when they keep saying that over and over again. You can see the Remnant of Ammon Lank. They aren't going to be able to continue firing now because they are going to be engaged in melee, and this is what the strength of the Orcs is going to be, because there simply is too many of them for the Remnant of Ammon Lank to hold back all on their lonesome. They will kill off a fair few, particularly if it's just Morannon units that they're going after. But the real strength is going to be in these arrows that Mirkwood are losing. You can see how the Savages of Karchost are coming forward as well. The Black Uruks coming in. The Elders of the Elven King are now just being committed to melee, where they will continue to try and carve their way through the Black Uruks. But this is the beauty of playing as the Elves. While you can sort of engage their archers in melee, their archers are very good in melee. Particularly the Elders of the Elven King and the Remnant of Ammon Lang. Very, very strong. The statue of Sauron there in the background as the Sindar of the Girdle sort of prepare for a nasty rear charge. Actually, I think it's about time we increased it to 1 speed. This could be the end of the Mordor general here, because this is going to be a nasty, nasty charge from the Sindar of the Girdle. The Troll Drummers are coming in here, so this could potentially be the end of the Mirkwood general as well if the Troll Drummers get a lucky hit. Mordor very, very lucky to not lose their general there, but the Witch Kings are cursed in a bad way. The Drake Broodlings are coming in, which is actually good news for me, because as I was marching forward I was worried the Drake Broodlings would try to break up my advance, but they are moving in here to try and go after Mirkwood, and considering the situation, J-Monster's done very, very well for himself, and now the Drake Broodlings are going after the Palace Guard, which is, it's a very bold strategy, because the Palace Guard in sustained melee are so lethal. And it's actually out here in the more open section of the map where Mirkwood are actually doing very well still. These attacks are being beaten back. The heavy Goblin infantry is just no match at all for the combination of heavy Elven spears and swords. The Drake Broodlings are doing their best to try and do some shock damage, but now they're being chased by the mighty Palace Guard. Over here, a combination of Mountain Orc Berserkers and heavy Goblin infantry fighting downhill into the Hiri Lang, which again, the numbers... Mirkwood should still win this fight though, to be honest. I mean, the heavy Goblin infantry will probably break before they're able to really utilise their numbers, which will be, of course, a bad thing for the Misty Mountains. But back here, things are going a little bit better for the Orcs. You can see that the Elders of the Elven King surrounded on both sides. The Black Uruk's a little bit stronger, of course, than the Maulers, but the numbers are the thing which is really going to come in clutch here for the Orcs, I think. Slowly but surely, they should win this backfield engagement just because they're swamping over Mirkwood. But Mirkwood, honestly, have had a pretty good time of these engagements thus far. And you can see the Mountain Orc Berserkers. They will actually win this engagement up on the hill because of a constant stream of heavy goblins, which will be good for them. You can see in the background there are also some reserves, in particular the crossbows. If they can get into position, then Mirkwood will really start to struggle as the Sindar of the Girdle charges in to maybe try and deal with the Drake Broodlings, stop them from getting their shock damage off. But yeah, you can see here large amounts of heavy goblin infantry broken and fighting to the death. But now we can see, I think it's time we went down to half speed once more. The engagement on the open field is starting to begin between Indie Pride and Guro-Chan. And again, I mean, this is a bold strategy from Kuro as well, just because overall, with the quality that Lothlorien are bringing to the field, you would imagine that they should be able to deal with this, but Angmar do have some pretty unique tools, a huge amount of Witch Realm Scourge Raiders, which it's not AP anymore, they're projectiles, but they have higher base damage, and against units like Karas Galadhon Swordmasters, who do not have a shield, those thrown axes could be very, very effective indeed. You can see over here that the trolls are coming forward in numbers. The Karas Galadhon Guardians, the target of the trolls, which is not a bad idea. Trolls, of course, can disrupt those pike phalanxes very effectively, but unfortunately for Kuro, Indie Pride is well on top of things because he has got these Lorien axes in melee against the trolls. That AP, that skill, is exactly the sort of unit. It's almost the perfect unit to counteract trolls with because they're not so elite that the units you lose from engaging trolls are too much of a problem. But they are elite enough to the point where trolls won't just roll over them. And the AP certainly won't hurt either. Actually, those archers are mine, I believe. Indeed, you can see that my March Wardens of the Wood, I'm giving Indie Pride a little bit of support with my archers over here, trying to shoot in with the fire arrows, because of course, Lothlorien's morale is going to be much higher than that of the Orcs. Even if Angmar, they don't really have any fodder units, so it's not going to be the easiest task in the world to break them. But even so, we should still have a pretty good time of it. If Indie Pride is also using his own archers, so a bit of crossfire going on here. You can also see the Karas Galadhon Swordmasters backing up the Lorien sentries. Now the Gundabad Guard is significantly better in 0.97, but this is still not the sort of engagement they really want. As we can see, the Angmar Catapult trying to do a bit of damage over there, but that was primarily friendly fire. They're going after the pikes, which again is very understandable. The Witch Realm Pikemen, you know, again, the Karas Galadhon Guardians are just so much better than the Witch Realm Pikemen because of that multiple HP. You can see over here as well that I'm starting... I've also sent over a couple of units of infantry because I realise actually now at this point we could finish off Angmar quite efficiently, so I'm going to send over a couple of units of my Lorien axes as well as just keep my March Wardens of the Wood in support of Indie Pride over here in this outer engagement while the rest of my army charges in to try and help out J-Monster. Now you can see over here that the Drake Broodlings are now routing because they got far too close to the Inner Council, and those spears are going to be very, very nice at dealing with that sort of engagement. Over here we have the Hiri Lang, who once again still just holding this line, and once again you can see that this fight has now flipped in favour of Mirkwood because the skill of Mirkwood, the staying power, is just going to be too much. Here in the backfield, however, the Orcs are starting to gain some ground. The Elders of the Elven King are surrounded and they are going to be finished off. And over here you can see that the Remnant of Amon Lank, a similar fate as before them with Sauron's Will on all sides, and the Olag Kaya here as well. But Mirkwood still have units left alive, which is more than they did in the other battles we played in this scenario. The Temple Executioners are over here as well, in conjunction with the Minas Morgul Chosen, fighting the Palace Guard and Hiri Lang. A real battle of the Titans over here, but Mirkwood holding on for dear life, so you can see over here now that I am starting to charge in some of my men. The Sylvan Spears are on station and the reinforcements are here, so Mirkwood have managed to hold on long enough for reinforcements to arrive, and my Sylvan Spears are immediately going to try and charge in and sort of relieve the beleaguered Hiri Lung and Palace Guard, because they've been fighting for some time and now they're up against fresh Temple Executioners. Even so, though, it says defeat is a distinct possibility for the Temple Executioners for a little bit there. The Sauron's Will are moving out now, so really it is just sort of me trying to rush my infantry into positions, Karasgaladhon spears. My units are winded because I've been sprinting them to try and get into the battle as quickly as I possibly can, but just the fact that we have units there is enough for me. Meanwhile, chaos on the open field. Arrows just flying all over the place, the Angmar catapults still just firing in. Over here, a huge clump of pikes is actually holding back the Lorien axes. As we move over here, the Witch Realm Scourge Raiders are now in melee. The Lorien Warriors, Indie Pride, doing a very good job at shutting down those Scourge Raiders as quickly as he possibly can. And that is also what I'm trying to do over here. You can see that my Lorien axes are moving in. Indie Pride's Outward Company also charging in to give me a little bit of support with that. So just trying to keep these Scourge Raiders from firing, because at this point, this is Kuro's best hope. To try and use these Scourge Raiders to try and do as much damage as possible. So if we can shut them down, we'll be in a very good place. And still my March Wardens of the Wood offering a bit of crossfire. Indie Pride's archers are still in the trees, I believe, shooting from there. The Inner Council also now using their javelins. Obviously the javelin's going to be very, very nice against these orcs. These Witch Realm Scourge Raiders, they were going to fire, but now they're going to try and get into a different position. Meanwhile, back in the settlement, we can see now that it is much more of a level playing field. What's left of Mirkwood, they are a little bit depleted at this point, but with all of these fresh reinforcements from the realm of Lothlorien, things should be a lot more even. You can see here the Hiri Lang still holding on. They don't actually need support, I don't think, up on this engagement, because they are going to win. Down here in the middle, however, this huge clump of Mordor forces. Still a bit of a problem. You can see there that my Inner Council now getting in here, shooting right along this Mordor infantry, and again, breaking could prove to be a real problem for the forces of the Orcs here in the late game. It's not going to be a problem for us, of course. Karasgaladhon Swordmasters moving in. The Olag Kai, a little bit battered and bruised at this point, only 5 of them remaining, and the high skill of the Elves. Now that Mordor don't really have a huge numbers advantage over here, the Olag Kai are getting a little bit isolated, and the Elves are starting to go to town. Another volley there from the Javelins, carving into the Morannon infantry. The Minas Morgul chosen it here. The Temple Executioners actually pulling through the Palace Guard. The Palace Guard are still clinging to life themselves, however. And now you can see the pièce de la résistance of the Lothlorien army. The Karasgaladhon Guardians, they're going to drop their pikes, and if they can get their pikes and their phalanx down against the Temple Executioners, that's absolutely an engagement I want to be taking. But the Temple Executioners are charging in to try and go after the heavy spears, which they will win against, of course, and you can see that there are still some Misty Mountains forces as well. Blackback Berserkers, Black Uruks the Mountains. So this unit of heavy spears is in dire straits, really. But elsewhere in the line, we're really starting to have an effect. Sauron's Will. I've actually pulled my March Wardens of the Wood, I think, inside the settlement now to try and really help out what's left of J-Monster's army. The Inner Council are now out of ammunition, so I'm going to commit them to melee to try and help out the Hiri Lung. See here the other unit of Karasgaladhon's Guardians, or is that the other unit? Nope, that's the same unit. More heavy spears moving forward, the other unit is back there. You see the Lorien Warriors, the Blade Masters, just sort of a mad dash to try and set up a battle line to really keep the Orcs contained. Meanwhile, out here on the open field, you can see that mostly it's, again, Indie Pride's army out here. I have to say, Indie Pride did for someone who obviously doesn't play the mod very regularly, you know, he is obviously he knows what Total War is all about, but the intricacies of each Total War game can change pretty significantly. And you know, he did exactly the right things here against the Angmar army. Try and close in, try and stop them from using those Scourge Raiders as efficiently as possible. And the skill of the Elves will do the rest. Over here, however, you do have a spare unit of Scourge Raiders, and it is over on this flank actually where Angmar have been successful, where they've got a lot of their pikes. But elsewhere in the line, you can see the Outward Company still running amok, the Company of the Mirror charging in to shut down that catapult at long last, and some Lorien axes as well. And over here, I believe, the final vestiges of the Witch Realm Blackguard are over here, and it's a combination of my Lorien axes, Indie Pride's, and his Karasgaladhon's Guardians. And that's going to be pretty much the end of Angmar. So Angmar did slow Indie Pride down, but most of my army just went around and did support J-Monster, so that's a very good engagement for us. So things certainly worked out for the better for us in those terms. More javelins flying in. Again, you can see these Lorien warriors at this point right in the thick of things. And you can see here the heavy goblin infantry really not enjoying being under javelin and fire arrow fire. They probably won't last much longer, indeed they are already wavering. Meanwhile, in and amongst these trees, you can see that the Karasgaladhon Swordmasters up against the Minas Morgul Chosen, which would definitely back the Elven Swordsmen in that engagement. Still a lot of Orcs though. J-Monster did manage to hold on with a few of his units, which is, again, better than we managed in the previous times we ran this scenario. But he doesn't have too much left, which means it's going to be down to mostly my army, and then whenever Indie Pride finishes off the remnant of Kuro's Angmar force, he will then be able to commit forward his army to help bring these orcs down. Again, we have the Blackback Berserkers over here, though, and the Karas Galadhon Swordmasters, very good heavy elven swordsmen. But the Blackback Berserkers are very, very damaging indeed. The Black Uruks are there as well, in varying numbers. The Temple Executioner is actually still pretty healthy, so that is worthwhile watching after. You can see there that the fire arrows, I'm going after the sort of the weaker units with my fire arrows to try and rob the orcs of their numbers, because if we can do that, then the battle is most certainly won. Sauron's Will, again fighting outnumbered over here. Over on this flank we're having a pretty good time of it. Sylvan Spears pushing over the hill, once again just sort of surrounding and entrapping as many orcs as we possibly can. The Karas Galadhon Guardians are so potent. When they get their pikes down, you really need to find some way of circumventing the phalanx. Once they do that, a very scary unit indeed. Black Uruks in the mountains charging in here. The Inner Council are here, trying to go after these troll drummers to take away that morale battery that the orcs have going for them. Because as soon as we can do that, obviously the orcs will start breaking all over the place. However, these Lorien warriors taking a bit of damage there from the heavy goblin crossbows, which are still a real danger. Breaking morale on infantry, however, as the Inner Council start to move forward. My Kindred of Celeborn are also getting into position as well. Let's see what's happening out on the open field. So once again, you can see here the Indie Pride at this point. Well, there goes the Mordor General, at the hands of the Blade Masters. You can see over here that Indie Pride at this point is surrounding and finishing off what's left of Angmar. The pikes obviously surrounded on all sides at this point. The Outward Company, the Lorien Axes. You can see here that there are the Kindred of Celeborn as well. So a classic surround here, and the pikes will not be able to hold on for all that much longer. And to be fair, Indie Pride's army is looking a little bit damaged. I mean, it is a little bit haggard at this point, but that's no real problem. I mean, there are still well, actually, no, that's Lorien Warriors, so yeah. Kuro coming in with the Witch Realm Scourge Raiders, but yeah, this is a pretty healthy army, all things considered. Going after Angmar, particularly with all of those Scourge Raiders and Trolls, things went pretty well for us out in the open field. And things went pretty well for us inside the settlement as well. The fact that Mirkwood was alive when I arrived was certainly a bonus for us, because that means I'm not having to fight all of these orcs all on my lonesome. There are still a few units from Mirkwood which are giving me a hand. In particular, the Sindar of the Girdle are a significant one, because they're able to get some rear charges, which will really help out. You can see over here Galatharan Blade Masters in here, alongside the Sword Masters of Karas Galadhon. The Blackback Berserkers are still a bit of a problem, however, and you can see those javelin projectiles I did manage to get my Inner Council into a position where they could fire, but the Black Uruks did charge in to stop them from firing, albeit probably only temporarily, now that they are shaken. You can see over there the March Warrens of the Wood continuing to fire, the Karas Galadhon Swordmasters over here finishing off this beleaguered unit of Minas Morgul Chosen. The real problem, however, is that I have managed to push in, because I really wanted to shut down the crossbows, and I have managed to do so. They are trying to shoot point blank, but obviously the Galatharan Blade Masters are just going to carve and cleave their way through a unit of crossbows, so finishing off really the last major threat to us within the settlement, and things are certainly looking pretty rosy for the elves at the moment. Sylvan Spears charging in, the Inner Council also over here, the Sylvan Spears. Again, it's mostly my units at this point, it must be said. There are a few very, very depleted units from Mirkwood, but again, J-Monster is still alive, his general's still alive as well, albeit he charged in here very boldly. Thranduil really needs to be careful here, because there are spears and Blackback Berserkers all around him. He is right in and amongst it at this point. Yeah, I'm not surprised my army's tired. It's been sprinting pretty much from the beginning. The Goblin King Bodyguard are getting in here, and they're fully healthy. So that's a pretty significant addition to this front line. This is definitely where the orcs are still at their strongest with all of their elites. I think as well, yes, you can see back here, the Temple Executioners did manage to worm their way in behind my lines and charge into my archers, but I immediately sort of turned all my other bowmen on them, including the Kindred of Celeborn, which are going to get into position. They have very, very nasty missile damage, as I'm sure everyone is aware. Indie Pride's army is also getting in here, getting into a position where he can potentially surround what's left of the orcs. At this point, it's clean-up duty. Victory is pretty much assured at this point for the elves. It's just a case of how significant our victory is going to be and how many men J-Monster has remaining, because obviously the main victory condition for us was to save Mirkwood. Can we save Mirkwood? Will he have anything left by the end? Because his army is looking a little bit haggard, and he's showing no signs of pulling his army out of combat, which is, I like that. definitely how it should be. Meanwhile, this single unit of heavy goblin infantry is trying to hold back a mighty Elven offensive. And things, needless to say, probably not going to go too well. And there, finally, the final remnant of Kuro's army finished off by Indie Pride. The inner council are now reloading as well, getting into a good position to use their jabbies. You can see over here, this other unit of crossbows did get into a position where they were firing from on high, but I managed to push a unit of my spears in. In fact, they have another unit of crossbows as well, so they do still have their crossbows firing, but resistance is futile at this point for the orcs. It's just a case of how many can they kill before they succumb. The Blackback Berserkers are still fighting as hard as they can. Those nasty hooked blades that they have. Very, very potent, of course, the March Ones of the Woods. Still using the fire arrows. Obviously, fire arrows do slow down the rate of fire pretty substantially. And honestly, it was just me forgetting to turn them off, because at this point, there are most of what they have left are elite units, so they're not really going to break. But I was using them earlier on to try and break the heavy goblin infantry and the lower tier Mordor units to sort of try and equalise the numbers a little bit. Goblin King Bodyguard trying to push through the pikes. And here we can see the Kindred of Celeborn. Dual wielders in melee, of course, but they haven't needed to get into melee. There are the Troll Drummers as well. Just keeping those units, even with just one of them. He'll be keeping what's left of the Goblin army from routing just that little bit longer. Well, I say that as they rout. And now the rest of these spears will be able to push down and kill off this troll. Here you can see these crossbows will actually be doing a fairly substantial amount of damage to me. But not for much longer, as finally the heavy goblin infantry give way. And now I'll be able to charge in. And there is no escape for the heavy goblin crossbows. And moving down here. Yes, pretty much it. I mean, the Temple Executioners undoubtedly are still alive back here. Actually, it's the Goblin King Bodyguard. And you can see over there that several units going flying the higher mass on the Kindred of Celeborn. Obviously, the Lothlorien projectiles will be getting a fairly major overhaul for 0.97. And again, like I said at the beginning, J-Monster has done a whole video on that explaining it. Over there, the Chaos Galactic Guardians. So yeah, the final elites are over here. Let's go over here, Kindred of Celeborn. As you can see over here, finally hunting down the heavy goblin crossbows, and of course they rout. Certainly they're not designed for melee combat, and that's going to be just about it for the backfield, and that will leave just the orc elites over here fighting in amongst my archers. Lorien Daxes moving in here as well, 27 of them. There are the Temple Executioners. Having a look at the final percentages, fairly good, fairly close considering it's 6 players, but overall fairly substantial victory for the elves, and I feel as though that comes down to, I think, the way Kuro decided to handle it, because the orcs had much more luck much more success, I should say, not luck, in the previous 2 times we ran the scenario, when all 3 of them dogpiled on Mirkwood and killed them very quickly. Even then, it was still a struggle for the 3 orc armies to then take on the onrushing Lothlorien armies, but at least then they could set up a good defence within the settlement with Mirkwood completely gone. In this case, I think it was good that this battle worked out a little differently. And I do think that the fact that Kuro came out to try and delay Lothlorien on the open field was an interesting plan. But ultimately, the Elven quality, the Elven archers, it was going to be very difficult, particularly with Angmar not having a huge amount of range power themselves. I mean, they did have all of those Scourge Raiders, but Scourge Raiders have a very limited amount of ammunition, and it can also be a little bit awkward to use all their ammunition effectively, even if they are very good in melee as well. But yeah, good victory for the elves, and all of our victory conditions were met. The first and foremost, we had to save Mirkwood, which we did, and if we couldn't save Mirkwood, it was just to try and win the battle and avenge them, but obviously that never came to pass. So obviously, Mirkwood getting the most kills, because they had the most to do early on. They had to kill off a lot of the fodder armies, both myself and Indie Pride getting a very similar amount of kills. Obviously, we had very similar jobs. And then for the orcs, again, very similar kills all around. Angmar getting just about the most. And again, that doesn't really surprise me, because Angmar had the most elite army of all the orcs on display. And Mordor and the Misty Mountains had... Mordor had a better melee force than the Misty Mountains, but the Misty Mountains did have those crossbows. Meanwhile, having a look at the kills. So, I'm actually not sure. I think the first one is my army. So, the MVPs from my army, not a huge amount of kills. Nothing that broke 200 for any of my units, purely because... Actually, no, I think, yes, this is Indie Pride's army, because he had Outward Company and I did not. The highest kills was from his Kindred of Celeborn and from his Outward Company, so both of his high-tier archers doing the business for him, and obviously his melee units for the most part, you know, going up against the less numerous Angmar army, not too surprising that some of his melee units didn't like crack 200, but even so. And then my army down here, the one unit did manage to break 200, and that was the Inner Council. The Inner Council, certainly my MVPs, once they got into position, throwing their javelins right along the Orc lines, a lot of damage done there. So yeah, Lothlorien, I think, you know, this is pre-overhaul for Lothlorien. In 0.97, Lothlorien are pretty much the faction at the moment which is having the most attention brought to it, in particular with how its skirmishes are being overhauled. So again, I know that I've said it several times already, but you really should check out J Monster's video to sort of show how Lothlorien are getting overhauled. They're getting new projectiles on a lot of their archers, including poison arrows, split shot arrows, and silver thorn arrows, which will give them their own sense of identity, because at the moment they don't really have anything unique which sets them apart, unlike Imladris, Linden, and Mirkwood. But even here, I think you can see how good Lothlorien can be, particularly when things get into a pretty savage melee fight. In addition to the potential holding power of Mirkwood holding off 2 armies at once that were far superior in terms of numbers. But the main attraction here, I think, was the map, you know, the ruins of DOL Guldur. And I look forward with all of these new assets when 0.97 comes around for all of the creative things that people can make. So I always like showing off new maps, and this new expanded tool set should make for some good ones. And this is only the start, I hope. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this. The next battle I'm going to do, I'm not quite sure. I do have a few on the back burner that I can do, sort of one of the more substantial sieges. It's been a little while since I've done Rivendell, to be fair, and I still have that glut of Rivendell sieges that people sent me all at once, so we might make a return to Rivendell next, even if I've shown it off a fair amount. I'm not sure. I do have a selection to pick from, so yeah, hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.